about people. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello, dear listeners, spirits and specters, and good morning or evening wherever you are across the 24 time zones, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. If this is your first time finding the signal, welcome aboard, but if you are returning for more, welcome back. This is episode 9, The Doctor vs. the Devil, in which we will examine the bizarre case of Dr. Richard Gallagher, in one of his most extreme cases in dealing with the phenomena of demonic possession. Then a story about a camping trip where the ghost stories you tell around the fire come to life. A few announcements before we begin. If you have a true ghost story for the Graveyard Shift segment, or a twisted tale of terror for the Light in the Attic Patreon segment, please send it to the ghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com or visit the ghostsignalpodcast.com and submit them there. If I read it on the show and you include a mailing address with your submission, I will send you a Ghost Signal sticker, a 3 a.m. sticker, and maybe some business cards too. Spread the word, come on, you know you want to. The Ghost Signal Patreon is now live, so if you wish to contribute to the show in that way you can. There is a $1 tier called the Spirit tier where you can listen to episodes ad-free on the same day as the regular episode releases. And there is a $5 tier called the Spectre tier in which you can also gain access to ad-free versions of the episodes, but also a Light in the Attic where I narrate creepypastas from all across the internet, and a short video where you can take a peek behind the curtain of the Ghost Signal. Are you a spirit or a specter? Go to www.patreon.com/the Ghost Signal podcast and choose the tier that's right for you. There is also a Discord server for the Ghost Signal. Discord is free to join, so feel free to jump in anytime to say hi and interact with other listeners who share a taste for the paranormal. Go to the ghostsignalpodcast.com and scroll down until you see the link. Click on the link, then click on the Join Server button, then click on the Join Now button and you're in. Soon there will also be community gaming where you can join me and others for a rousing game of Outlast or other such titles. So download the Discord app, create your free account, and come hang out with us on the Ghost Signal podcast server today. Onwards to content. The academic world is loath to accept the possibility that anything that cannot be reproduced in the lab could exist. It's the fourth step of the scientific method, experimentation, that creates the problem. You can't experiment on something you can't reproduce at will. But what if we looked at it from a slightly different angle? This is the story of psychiatrist Dr. Richard Gallagher and his involvement with the exorcisms of a satanic high priestess. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
First, let's learn a little bit about Dr. Gallagher. He is a board-certified psychiatrist, a professor of psychiatry at New York Medical, and a psychoanalyst on the faculty of Columbia University. He is a Princeton graduate, Phi Beta Kappa in classic literature, and trained as a resident in psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine. He's got some credentials, dear listeners. He is considered to be the world's foremost scientific expert on demonic attacks and has been an active member of the International Association of Exorcists since the 1990s. He grew up in the suburbs of New York City in the 1950s and 60s, at a time when the supernatural was simply relegated to Hollywood and the fanatical. It was when he was a student at Princeton pursuing his degree in classic literature that he started to notice how many educated and well-respected authors entertained the idea of the spirit world. It was this that sparked his deep interest into workings of the human mind. After graduating, he traveled to France to teach high school and play semi-pro basketball. Living the life of a young man abroad had all but erased the thought of the paranormal that had so fascinated him back home. That is until his brother told him that a local witch had cured some stubborn warts on his hands. The old woman told his brother to go to a bridge on the outskirts of town at midnight, repeat an incantation 3 times, then throw 3 beans over his shoulder into the river below. And most importantly, he had to believe, really believe, that it would work. And it did. The next morning, the warts had completely vanished. This created in Richard a deep interest in the possibilities of psychosomatic medicine, the power of the mind to heal the body in seemingly unnatural ways. His interest grew deeper when he found out that he had played a basketball game near the small town of Lodoun, where in the 17th century a famous case of a convent of possessed nuns shocked Western Europe. Almost everyone in the modern era has dismissed the case as mass hysteria, but a closer look at eyewitness accounts shows that they were speaking in foreign languages they couldn't possibly have known, and were spontaneously contortionists. Have you ever known a bunch of nuns going berserk who just happened to be at the same time highly gymnastic? Was the question posed by a local French professor. He then came to the States to begin his medical training at Yale University. He put his interests on hold again until his graduation, when a new cultural phenomena was emerging. The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. See episode 3 for more on that. He, like many of his contemporaries, were trying to scrounge up any information they could about the actual case of Ronald Hunkeler, but details were sparse. Up until this point, he had spent his entire life in academia, and now he was beginning to make a name for himself as a skilled psychopharmacologist, and was starting to think about applying for research grants as a career as an academic psychiatrist was taking shape. That all changed one morning in 1990 when an elderly priest named Father Jacques knocked on his office door and wanted his help to evaluate a young woman. He then explained he was one of the few official exorcists in the United States. He wanted Dr. Gallagher to meet with a Hispanic woman named Maria and her husband Alejandro. She was being beaten every night by invisible hands, while poor Alejandro could do nothing but stand by and watch. They could not figure out why she was being targeted or by what or who, whether it was demonic oppression or a bruja's curse, although they could think of nobody who would wish harm upon them. The couple seemed sincere and in good mental health. The thought of Alejandro abusing his wife was never questioned. He was clearly enamored with her. Dr. Gallagher told the good father that he could find no diagnosable psychiatric or medical condition to explain it. Sometime later, Father Jacques reported that after much prayer and spiritual efforts, the condition faded and eventually disappeared. This started a years-long working relationship with Father Jacques, where he honed his skills at observing suspected cases of possession and determining which ones were authentic. And then he met Julia. One night around 3 a.m., his family's 3 cats, normally docile and loving animals, were tearing at each other like champion prize fighters. Once he and his wife got them separated, they continued to snarl and hiss at nothing in particular. Richard and his wife went back to bed thinking to blame some bad cat food or a catnip binge gone wrong. The next morning, Father Jacques rang the doorbell, and he was not alone. Standing with him was a slim petite woman about 40 years old. She was dressed in black pants, a dark purple blouse, and her eyeliner extended to her temples. Father Jacques introduced her as Julia and stated that she had something to confess. Julia, with a slight smirk on her lips, asked how he liked those cats last night. He couldn't believe his own thoughts. Could she actually have had something to do with that? What am I getting myself into? After they left, Richard spent the rest of the day commiserating, and the more he thought about it, the more upset he got. He called the father that evening, demanding answers. Richard couldn't believe Father Jacques had brought that woman right to his front door. He explained that Julia was seeking an exorcism, but thought she could change her mind at any time. She believed that being possessed granted her certain supernatural abilities, but now the demons that inhabited her had begun to break her down mentally and physically. Dr. Gallagher agreed to meet with her at his home office the next day. When the father and Julia arrived, she didn't say hello, shake hands, or even make eye contact. She went straight to the windowsill and started watering all of his plants. She claimed that Satanists such as herself love the natural world, all plants and animals. Well, almost all animals, she smirked. She told Dr. Gallagher her philosophy as follows: indulgence instead of abstinence, vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams, vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. That's straight from Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, by the way, dear listeners. She then went on to state that she knew that she was possessed, that she spaces out sometimes and doesn't recall what's happened. While she knew it was a demon, she knew it wasn't Satan himself. He doesn't bother with such trivial things. But it is from him. He controls everything. She's followed his every command for years. It wasn't necessarily what she said that struck Dr. Gallagher. It was the way she said it. Her demeanor was calm and in control, and she was clearly well-spoken and intelligent with a firm hold on reality, and saying these outlandish things as if she were reading a grocery list. He asked her why she thought she had become possessed, to which she said she didn't know. Satan must have had his reasons, she assumed, and although she didn't want to defy her master, certainly not in front of her cult, she had a deep sense that she needed to get rid of this possession, that it had started to take its toll. After a while, he gained some modicum of trust with her. He wasn't seeing her as a doctor, just an observer, a volunteer, so he couldn't charge her, and he knew that the less you say in a conversation, people often tell you everything, and she was quite eager to do just that. She explained that Satan had granted her certain powers to use at her whim for the express purpose of causing chaos. In addition to agitating pets, she could also remote view or see things from afar using only her mind's eye, along with other abilities she would not disclose. Throughout their initial conversation, he constantly found himself in awe of the coherence of her reasoning. A few days after their initial visit, Richard, Father Jacques, and Julia were cruising down an interstate, looking for a suitable place to begin the exorcisms, or at least that's what the father wanted them to believe. He was actually seeing how Julia reacted in a more relaxed social setting. Right after, Father Jacques explained that he would be the assisting exorcist, and that the chief exorcist was an interesting character, a deep, raspy voice came from the back seat. It commanded the two men to leave her alone and told the stupid monkey priest that he would be sorry. She had a vacant and distant look in her eyes and continued on like this for another 10 minutes. Dr. Gallagher felt that the monkey priest bit was an indication of how demons must view us humans. After Julia came to, she had no memory of what had just happened. 3 days later, the second interview with Julia took place, except this time in Father Jacques' office. He wanted to know more about her status in the cult. She explained that she's the priestess, their queen, Satan's queen, and that she trusted him alone. She went on to explain that her powers were the traditional privileges of someone with her status. She demonstrated her ability to gain accurate knowledge of a person without ever having met them when she told Dr. Gallagher that his mother had died as a result of ovarian cancer. She had no way of knowing this because, dear listener, these were the days before Google. After their session, he called Father Jacques to recount the events of that day and discuss a venue for the exorcism, when another voice invaded their call. The voice belonged to neither man, but existed nonetheless. It said to them in a hissing voice to leave her alone, that she belonged to the demons, not the priests, and that they'll be sorry. It was the same voice they heard come from Julia a few days before. Incredulous, Richard asked Father Jacques if he heard that, and the father said that he's heard voices like that come through several times, but only in the most extreme cases. The exorcism started. They went on for a while without success, and indeed not much of anything had happened, but Julia was getting harder to convince that she should keep going. Before the next exorcism was to take place, Dr. Gallagher had a long talk with her about what her hesitancy was about, even though she was requesting them. She told him, looking at her feet, that she was scared and suffering and needed to get rid of this. He asked her to elaborate, and she told him almost everything. Julia had grown up Catholic and had attended Catholic school, but never took it seriously. She said that her home life wasn't so great, which Richard had fully expected to hear. When she was a teenager, a priest took an interest in her and then began molesting her. She actually didn't mind at first. She liked the attention, until she got older and realized what was actually happening. This created her disillusionment with the church, and explained why she joined a cult of Satanists soon after. It wasn't long before she fell in love with the cult's leader known only as Daniel. He was dark-skinned and domineering, the bad boy type that she didn't know she liked until she met him. She went on to explain how sex played an incredibly important part of their cult and their rituals, and that she got her status by being Daniel's favorite, and by being what she called a breeder. I won't get into detail about what that means. I'll just say that she was very fertile, and that the blood of the innocent was prized above all things in her cult. But as she was entering her 40s, she was no longer nearly as fertile, and Daniel himself had been kicked out of the cult and may have actually been killed. She was afraid that she was becoming expendable, and that her life may also be in danger too if word got out that she was having exorcisms. But she was trying to have it both ways, to continue being the satanic High Queen, but also being delivered from her possession by the power of God. She didn't seem to understand that exorcisms aren't magic spells, that she had to commit to spiritual well-being in order for it to work, and she just seemed unable to do that, probably just being too afraid to give up her position in the cult, the only family she's ever felt like she's belonged with. But in the end, she agreed to continue with the exorcisms. It was around this time that Richard finally met the chief exorcist, a stern old priest known only as Father A. Julia told Richard that Father A was their number one enemy, and how they wanted to, quote-unquote, get him. A few weeks later, just before her next exorcism session, Father A brought Richard up to speed about Julia. He explained that as they were talking to her, she got cold feet and turned non-committal. The two priests talked to her for over an hour, but it was no use. She just wanted to go home, so they all got in Father A's car and left for her house. It was after dark and they felt apprehensive about driving her home, but what choice did they have? They didn't get too far before she slipped into her demonic trance and started berating the two priests. Then she fell silent, after which she let out a nasty growling sound. That's when the spirits appeared. They were dark, fleeting, wavy things that materialized directly in front of the windshield. There were so many of them that neither man could see the road. Then their lights went out, headlights and instrument panel lights. Unable to see anything, Father A pulled the car over into the ditch. Julia was simply smirking in the back seat. Eventually, the lights came back on and they got to Julia's house, where she simply opened the door and got out and went inside. Richard remembered thinking that they should not have hardly expected any gratitude and that they were lucky to still be alive. It was not wise to drive a possessed woman home at night. 2 weeks later, the final ritual took place. Julia arrived half an hour late, extremely nervous to proceed. But proceed she did, and signed the necessary prerequisite forms. The two fathers brought 2 nuns with them to help with restraining Julia while avoiding any misconduct allegations. The demon targeted the nuns first, calling them every vulgar name under the sun. Julia fought against her restraints for a full 2 hours without a rest. The nuns' assistance proved invaluable as Julia, secured in her chair, began to levitate, and continued to do so for a half an hour. All those present corroborated the story. If the nuns hadn't been holding her, she would have floated straight to the ceiling. After Julia once again became earthbound, her demons explained that they would never leave because Julia had personally invited them all in, and she enjoyed their favors. She displayed a repulsion to holy water but not tap water, even though she wasn't told which was which. She also spoke in many different languages fluently, and spoke flawless Latin. She also made the room frigid at one point, then immediately turned it into a sauna. It felt like they were in a dangerous tropical jungle. The intensity of the ritual was unprecedented. At the end of it, Julia quickly returned to normal and remembered nothing. The sad end to this story is that Julia's exorcisms had failed. Her faith in the devil proved too powerful for her desire for help. She felt that her position in the cult was in jeopardy, and that Satan had already punished her. She described terrible burning sensations frequently, as well as various other pains. In the end, it was Daniel's attention she wanted more than anything, and her beliefs were a reflection of that desire. Several months later, Dr. Gallagher and Father Jacques flew to her hometown to visit her and to check up on her condition, and she proved uninterested in continuing with the exorcisms. On their flight home, both Richard's wife and secretary got a phone call from a man posing as a priest and a friend, telling them both that he and Father Jacques had died in a horrible accident, but of course they were both fine. A few weeks later, Dr. Gallagher found himself being followed by two women in their 30s who wore their eyeliner the same way Julia did while he was walking along East 29th Street in New York City. As soon as he dared to make eye contact with them, they disappeared. Dr. Gallagher only had one more interaction with Julia at the behest of Father Jacques to check on her health. She told him that she had terminal cancer and wanted to be free of her demons before she died, but follow-up phone calls went unanswered, and no help came. Her fate remains unknown. If you liked that story, dear listeners, Dr. Gallagher has many more, and we will definitely be revisiting him in the future. But as for now, the clock strikes midnight. It's time to clock in for the graveyard shift. This story comes to us from the Ghost Signal patron known as Lost Star Salvatore, and is about a camping trip she will never forget, where thought became reality. She writes, I remember when I was a lot younger, I was part of a group called Brownies where you can earn patches for different activities and running around playing with friends. But I couldn't wait to join the Girl Guides for one reason only, camping. But I wasn't happy there. It turned out to be a very girly place, which just wasn't me, and once I was there, I couldn't wait to leave. Then a couple of years later, the Boy Scouts started letting girls in, and I jumped at the chance to join. So a couple of months later, we were getting ready to go camping. It would be an international camp, where Brownies, Cubs, Girl Guides, Scouts, and Adventure Scouts would be attending from all around the world. There would be lots of competitions and activities to take part in. I was so excited, I just couldn't wait, mostly because this would be my first camping trip. We were told that the place we were traveling to wasn't that far away, only an hour or so, near a place called Skelmersdale. The scout troop I was with had been there quite a few times, but loved going to that site, and we had gone quite a few times after this trip as well. The scout leaders loved telling us that it's an old campsite with a lot of history, and wouldn't waste time telling us tales from the past about the place. It would be things like how it had a mansion on the land that had burned down. One tale would be about a highwayman who had died in the area and the white lady that had drowned in the lake. Finally, it was time to go, and everyone was very excited about going, and there was a great atmosphere. When we finally got there, I realized that the campsite looked creepy. The way the trees hung over the pathways just gave the place a creepy vibe. But I just thought, hey, this is cool, and couldn't wait to get started. The scout leaders led us to where we would be camping. I looked at the site numbers as we passed each one. The group stopped at Site 13. Unlucky for some, said one of my friends, and the group laughed nervously. It's a tradition, as you may know, that when you go camping you tell creepypastas, and that is just what happened for the 3 nights we were there. Here's what I remember from those nights. The story for the first night was about the old burned-out mansion and the highwayman together. One night, the mansion was set on fire with the whole family in sight, including the servants. No one knew who had done it or why, but a highwayman had been seen fleeing the scene and had died in his haste to escape. Yes, it was one of those weird stories with a lot of what-ifs. With a twist. If you find yourself near the remains of the mansion late at night, then maybe, just maybe, you will hear the dying screams of the people trapped inside. Smell the smoke from the fire and watch the highwayman fleeing unknowing of his doom. Other people say the highwayman was shot just before he told his tale of the truth. He now roams the road looking for revenge. There is a toilet block on that road, and if you find yourself needing to use that block, then don't look in the mirrors because legend has it he will be waiting for you. On saying that, during that night I and the other girls needed to use that block. We got there with nothing happening on the way. I waited outside for the others. Suddenly I heard one of the girls screaming. I looked around and saw them running out. I asked them what had happened. They said they dared each other to look into the mirrors, and they saw the highwayman. Night 2. They decided to tell the story about the White Lady. They started the story with, "On a stormy night," and on that exact moment the wind did start getting worse. They paused for effect, then continued. There's a white lady that haunts the campsite around by the lake that we are not far from. She had died on her wedding night, vanished without a trace. She had gone looking for her love, not realizing how close to the lake she had got. Before she knew it, she was at the water's edge. She slipped and fell in and drowned. So every night since, she can be seen searching for her beloved, not being able to rest until she has found him. Just then I looked towards the trees. I would have sworn to God that I could see a faint white figure moving slowly along the path that leads towards the lake. When I looked away and then back again, she was gone. I asked a friend if they had seen anything, but they hadn't, and they thought I had imagined the whole thing. Camping trips in the UK are very different than those here in the States, at least from what I recall. Although I do remember when I was in Scouts, my troop camped directly in the middle of an old forgotten family cemetery, as that was the plot camp organizers had assigned to us. I didn't experience anything myself, but one of the other boys had a miserable time sleeping because he kept seeing shadows outside of our tent after everyone was asleep, and sometimes heard laughter from the tree line. Would you like to share your story? If you would, please visit theghostsignalpodcast.com and follow the link to email me, and I will put it in a future episode. If you would like to be one of the cool kids, visit www.patreon.com/theghostsignalpodcast to gain access to exclusive content. Join the Ghost Signal Discord server and hang out with other listeners from all across the globe. A quick thanks to Lost Star Salvatore for the excellent story. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing wizardry by Hale, creative direction by Cassie, and Patreon mastery by Brooks Bigley. And my name is Jeff, your friendly control operator and your ghost host with the most. The next time the Ghost Signal haunts your eardrums, we will examine the story of Sarah Winchester and her famous mansion in Southern California. So until then, dear listeners, spirits and specters, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.